Good evening. Katie is off tonight. Egypt's President Hosni Mubarak is facing the most serious threat to his 30-year-old regime. For decades, anger has simmered near the surface in Egypt and throughout the Arab world. Anger over corrupt governments, poverty, and a lack of freedom. Today, for the fourth straight day, protesters poured into the streets of Cairo and other cities in Egypt, throwing rocks at the police, who fired back with water cannon, rubber bullets, and tear gas. President Mubarak imposed a curfew and cut off all internet access. He also called out the military to restore order. Late tonight, Mubarak went on television and said he's firing his cabinet, but he is staying put. This wave of protests began 2 weeks ago in Tunisia with the overthrow of the president. Today in Tunis, police again clashed with protesters who want the prime minister to resign as well. And thousands marched today in Jordan. They also want their prime minister to step down amid rising food prices and high unemployment. Tonight, though, the world's attention is focused on Egypt, anxious to see if the Mubarak government can survive. Elizabeth Palmer reports from Cairo.
By nightfall, central Cairo looked like a war zone. Anti-government protesters had fought their way past police and pushed into the very heart of the city, cheering and chanting, "We demand the end of the regime." Hours earlier, after Friday prayers, crowds set out to march, but almost immediately they were stopped by lines of police in full riot gear who beat them and fired round after round of tear gas and rubber bullets.
That's the front line right there. That's where the police lines are preventing people from getting to the center of town. These demonstrators are penned in and furious.
They want one thing.
We don't want this party anymore. Go, leave out of Egypt.
People are demanding an end to corruption, to abuse, unemployment, but above all, they want to see the end of President Hosni Mubarak.
Mubarak, go away of Egypt. Go away of Egypt.
The main standoff played out on Qasr El Nil Bridge over the Nile River. Protesters who funneled here from all parts of the city were determined to cross into downtown. A brave few rushed forward through the volleys of tear gas. The mass followed until they were pushed back again by the police. But the protesters refused to give up, at one point pausing as a group to pray. Elsewhere around the city, skirmishes left the injured to be tended by the crowd. They're firing rubber bullets, says this demonstrator, and they're firing them right in our faces. East of Cairo, in the city of Suez, protesters attacked a police van. The driver was finally forced to escape by driving through the crowd. As dusk fell in Cairo, the crowds had grown so huge, pressing forward from the bridge, throwing rocks, until the police seemed simply to give up, and the crowd streamed forward into Cairo's Freedom Square. Nearby, a powerful symbol of Mubarak's regime, his political party headquarters, was looted and set ablaze. Authorities had announced curfew in cities across the country, but in Cairo, at least, nobody paid any attention. Then, suddenly, the army appeared, and the protesters cheered, climbing on the military vehicles and welcoming the soldiers who appeared to be under orders to guard strategic public buildings. Finally, after midnight, President Hosni Mubarak appeared on television and told the country, "I will ask my government to resign and tell the new government to work with the current situation."
So President Hosni Mubarak made a concession there, but it certainly isn't the one the demonstrators were asking for. He's going to fire the cabinet, but he does remain president, and the power is concentrated very much in his hands. Harry?
So, Liz, even at this late hour, there are still people in the streets. What is the situation there now?
It's still very unstable. You may be able to hear people shouting. It seems plausible that the news of the speech has made it into the crowds and it's inflamed them. We can also see the police retaking territory they lost earlier in the day. And I believe we were hearing live rounds, which we didn't hear earlier on. So it may be we're seeing the beginning of a crackdown, but the demonstrators aren't giving up.
So we know that the government has shut off the internet, shut off Twitter, but were people around Egypt able to watch this, actually watch it unfold on their television sets?
Astonishingly, Egyptian state television, which usually toes the party line, was showing pictures of what was going on here. And furthermore, the Arab satellite channels have covered it like a blanket. So anybody who has access to a television in Egypt knows exactly what's going on.
And Liz, is there any way to guess what might unfold tomorrow?
We are in completely uncharted waters here, Harry. There's no question Egyptians will wake up tomorrow to a new chapter in their history, but whether it would be ugly or hopeful, I don't think anybody knows tonight.
Liz Palmer in Cairo this evening. Thank you very much. And just moments ago, President Obama made a statement about the turmoil in Egypt.
Our first concern is preventing injury or loss of life. So I want to be very clear in calling upon the Egyptian authorities to refrain from any violence against peaceful protesters. The people of Egypt have rights that are universal. That includes the right to peaceful assembly and association.
The administration faces some very tough questions tonight: whom to support, a trusted ally or the people in the street. Chip Reed is at the White House and has more tonight. Chip?
Well, Harry, we've been waiting all day to hear from the president. We finally did. He's still walking that fine line. On the one hand, condemning the Egyptian authorities for the violence and supporting the protesters, but he's also reluctant to give up old American friend Hosni Mubarak.
We are urging that there be a restraint on the part of the security forces.
In Washington, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton took the lead, calling on the Egyptian government to stop the violence, while at the White House, Press Secretary Robert Gibbs voiced sympathy for the Egyptian people.
Their grievances have reached a boiling point, and they have to be addressed.
But the administration stopped short of explicit threats or angry denunciations of Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, who, despite his authoritarian rule, has been a vital U.S. partner in the Arab world for 30 years. He's worked closely with Presidents Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and now President Obama, who in 2009 invited Mubarak to the Oval Office.
I'm grateful to President Mubarak for his visit, for his willingness to work with us on these critical issues.
Issues ranging from Middle East peace to the war in Iraq to Iran's nuclear weapons program. Despite that close relationship, the U.S. has little control over Mubarak's actions now. Today, using what leverage it has, the White House warned Egypt it's considering cutting foreign aid. During the 3 decades of Mubarak's rule, Egypt has ranked second in U.S. aid with a staggering $68 billion. Mubarak's survival is impossible to predict, and even if he does, his plan to make his son his heir apparent is now in serious jeopardy. That uncertainty has the White House walking a tightrope.
Clearly, we've got to walk a fine line between supporting democracy and the principles we espouse and supporting countries and allies that have been long-standing friends to the United States.
He has had a blank check, and somebody has to wake him up.
But former U.S. Ambassador to Egypt Edward Walker says it's time for the Obama administration to side more forcefully with the Egyptian people, even if that means abandoning their longtime ally.
We don't need Mubarak. We need Egypt. Egypt's very important to us, but Mubarak is not Egypt.
And making clear how little control the United States has of this situation, the president said, in the end, the future of Egypt is in the hands of the Egyptian people. Harry?
Chip Reed at the White House tonight. Thank you. Richard Haass is president of the Council on Foreign Relations. He is at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Richard, the United States government has been such a good friend to Hosni Mubarak for a long time, yet the White House is clearly very sympathetic to the people in the streets in Cairo and the other cities in Egypt. It really leaves the United States in quite a precarious position.
You're right, it is precarious, but the United States has to be very careful. The stakes here are enormous, Harry. Egypt is somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of the entire Arab world. If instability comes to Egypt, it'll send shockwaves throughout the rest of the Arab world. It's the first country to establish peace with Israel. It's indeed the cornerstone of what peace there is in the Middle East. So if the United States is seen to pull the rug out from under this friend, which, as you noted in the report, a friend for some 3 decades, it'll raise major questions about American reliability. On the other hand, if we're seen to give him an uncritical embrace, it could risk alienating the Egyptian people and of some future government we may have to work with.
We've seen this go on now in Tunisia. There were protests today in Jordan. There were protests in Yemen yesterday. What is going on here?
Well, what we're seeing is a part of the world that has largely missed out on many of the great trends of modern decades. There really hasn't been anything like the political and economic reform in the Middle East that we've seen in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America, and Africa. And suddenly it's coming, and it's coming suddenly. In part triggered by the Tunisian experience and the social media, but the Middle East was ripe for this kind of change. The kindling, if you will, is extraordinarily dry here, and that's what we're seeing not just in Egypt, but also in several other countries.
And how much should we be concerned about what a new Egypt might look like?
Well, we should be very concerned. The last thing we want to have, say, is an Egypt in chaos or an Egypt dominated by Islamic fundamentalists. We don't want to see that sort of experience there. So the United States has to be very careful in how it manages this situation. And if the government survives, and we should take our cue from the Army here, if the government survives, then we should try to work out a long-term reform program. If, however, the government can't survive, and again, the Army will tell us this, perhaps as early as tomorrow, Harry, then we have to start working on on Plan B, on putting into place some alternative. The one thing we never want to have in Egypt is the sort of thing, say, we had in Iran 3 decades ago, where the choice is between an authoritarian government and a radical Islamist alternative. So we either want to push the Mubarak government in the direction of reform, or if it's too late for that, we want to work with some successor government.
Richard Haass in Davos tonight. Thank you very much for your expertise. Do appreciate it, sir.